and Daniel. We're going to do all 12 chapters of Daniel. We're going to go through, and then that's going to open up the book of Revelation for us because the timeline you're going to see here, from what I've seen from studying, and we're going to look at these things. In chapter 2, when the dream is given to Nebuchadnezzar, that opens up this timeline of prophecy, of world history. It's incredible, and it sets up the timeline for Revelation chapter 13 and other stuff as well. But it's amazing. So we're going to get into it. We're just going to go through Daniel chapter 1 here. We're just going to read verse by verse. So Daniel chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it." Okay, so we see Babylon coming to persecute Jerusalem. Jerusalem would represent God's people, God's church. Besieged, he would besieged it. He would. It makes me think like when somebody lays siege on another country or something, they encircle it and they kind of camp out and wait them out and wait for them to surrender. Uh, because they're going to starve and they can't leave and just everything's going to fall apart. So, and we know from what I've studied in the scriptures, when God's people, because Israel continued to disobey God and they would fall away from the faith, and they would accept other gods and all kinds of, and get deep into sin. And then God would send prophets to them, and then constantly the prophets are always rejected. They were cast into prisons, and some of them were killed and stoned. This always happens. In the modern day, it happens too. God will raise up people to send to his church, to his main denomination, because God's people always get deceived. And then the prophets will go and they will tell them, like, look, you've been deceived. Here's the truth. I see this through everything I study. I keep seeing that. Going all the way back to Elijah, Moses, Abraham. It's incredible. It's really incredible, especially with Elijah and the false prophets of Baal. What people don't realize is that they were Israel. It was Israel. It was the false prophets of God's church, his people. So anyways, let's continue in verse 2. It says, "And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand." So the Lord let this happen. He allowed this to happen because, and this is God having mercy on his people, because he's going to put them in slavery. And we look at this thinking like that's a bad thing, but it's a good thing because he's calling them all to come back to him. God tries to save everybody. Because if we die and we're not born again, we're not gonna we don't get eternal life. I mean, we're gonna die in the second death. So he doesn't want that. So he's gonna put these people into slavery and into bondage, and he's gonna call them, try to show them their error. That's another thing I always see in the scriptures. And God doesn't do that to hurt anybody. He loves everybody, and he's gonna put them into bondage, just like they were put into Egypt for 400 years or 430 years. I think it was 400 total, 430, but I think it was 400. But we'll have to look at that later. But it's because he's calling his people back to him. He's trying to show them their error in their ways. So that's pretty incredible. And there's a lot of stuff we're going to see here in chapter 1. But let's look at verse 3. It says, "And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes." And we see what's happening here. What do we see happening here? Nebuchadnezzar is asking for the royal family, like the king's seed, the leaders of the people, because what's the best way to deceive a nation, to deceive a people, to deceive them? It's to deceive their leaders, and then their leaders will go and deceive them. That's why Satan attacks anybody that has influence. He will do everything in his power to deceive them, because he knows if, let's say, the thing about this, you guys, it's something I've noticed too. Let's say you got a church of 1 million people, Okay, and there's one pastor. What do you think's the easiest? What would be the easiest, the most efficient way to deceive the entire church? I've thought about this. I see it all in a lot of different scriptures. Would you go around to each and every single person and try to deceive them? Or would you just go to the pastor? Think about that. Isn't that's a mind shift when you start thinking like that? In order to deceive 1 million people of that church, the best, easiest, and most efficient way is to deceive the pastor, the leader of that church. So if you deceive one man, you deceive 1 million. You see what I'm saying? Isn't that incredible? That's why leaders are so got to be on guard, because Satan, he will do anything in his power to trip them up, to deceive them, to make them think they know the truth. And we got to be so careful, you guys. We got to pray and ask God to reveal truth in the Bible to us. That's all I want. And I hope that's what you want. And I don't want church doctrine. I want Bible. It's the only thing that can't lie to me. So let's read it. All right. So so anyways, we see Nebuchadnezzar. He wants to bring in all like the leaders of the people, the royal. All right, verse 4. Children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Do you see? He wants to brainwash him. He wants to teach him the ways of Babylon. We see the tongue, which is the language. So he wants to educate them in his ways. Brainwash is what we're saying. That's how Satan does it. So, and that's why you bring the smartest people and the royal people from them to brainwash, deceive them, and then they'll go back and they'll deceive all their people. It's incredible, but you guys see that there in verse 4? It's huge. We're going to see this theme as we go on and continue. Kind of in the background, we see this going on. Verse 5 says, And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years. Okay, so 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Okay, so 3 years. What do we see here? He appoints them a portion of the king's meat. We're not even supposed to eat meat. Really not even really clean meat, because man has made it unclean, all the chemicals and poisons. And then we see the wine of Babylon. Okay, what is the meat? The word, the wine, the teachings, the doctrines. So we're seeing all these things. So verse 6 says, Now among these were of the children of Judah Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So those are the 4 Hebrews that are in focus here. Verse 7, Unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. This is huge. We're going to see this. For he gave unto Daniel the name Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah, Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. So right away they're trying to change their names. What are we seeing here? We're seeing a change of diet, king's meat, the wine, education, language, and we're seeing name change. Those 3 things: diet, education, name change. We know when a name in the Bible represents and denotes character. So a name change, like in the Old Testament, we see this a lot, and with Paul. For he was Saul, but when he was born again, he became Saul. He was Saul, and he became Paul because he was born again. In the Old Testament, do we see people have a name change? A name change represents a character change because that person is born again. Do we see any name changes? That's why we see him in the Old Testament. Abram, he became Abraham. Another one would be Jacob. His name was Jacob, deceiver, supplanter, but he was given the name Israel because he overcame. He was born again. Isn't that incredible? It's just awesome. But so a name change represents a character change. So with the wrong diet, which Satan's done to all of us, okay, that's why I'm trying to lose a lot of weight right now. And I started a diet a couple days ago because I've gained so much weight. And I've been bloated, and I've been eating, fast foods and the pops and just the American lifestyle. It's not healthy. So you got to change. I want to change all that: vegetables, fruits, water, natural. But we see diet, education will lead to a name change, a character change. This is how the brainwash happens. But notice verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine with which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So Daniel, this is what God's people need to do. We need to purpose it in our hearts that we will not defile ourselves. The diet, the education, the food, the unclean things, all of it. Verse 9 says, now check this out, now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So the prince of the eunuchs loved Daniel. God, he brought him into favor. He was very favored. And the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your meat and your drink. Meat and drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? So he thinks by doing this, they're going to look worse. They're going to be feeble and weak. And this is what he thinks. Because he thinks, the Babylon diet, that's the best diet you can be on. Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. He's basically saying, I'm in charge of this. If you show like you're weak and lacking, the king's going to kill me. Because I'm in charge of your well-being. But remember, Daniel's brought in well favor and love of the prince of the eunuchs. And we're going to see verse 11. Then said Daniel to Melzar, so that's his name, Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel. Oh, Melzar is the guy under him. Okay. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Notice what he says. He says, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Now, I got the Strong's numbers off right now, but the word pulse there, from what I'm able to tell, means vegetables. Okay, and water to drink. He's like, look, I want vegetables and water. That's it. Verse 13. And this is what we should be on, a plant-based diet with water. This is what I'm trying to switch over to. It's very difficult because we've been brainwashed and we've lived a certain way for so long. Verse 13 says, now notice what Daniel says, then let our countenances, let our bodies be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. He's like, compare us. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. If we look a lot worse and feeble and weak and all that compared to the other ones, then you can deal with us the way you want. So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. So he put them on a 10-day plan, 10 days at a time. All right. And now check this out, verse 15. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Just in 10 days, you guys, 10 days, there was a drastic difference when they compared Daniel and the 3 Hebrews to the rest of the Babylonian kids their age. There's a huge Daniel and the other 3. They looked much stronger and just healthier and everything, fatter in flesh. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse. So he's like, all right, I proved you 10 days, you can have it. So the meat and the wine were taken away. The meat makes me think, the flesh of Christ, the meat, the Word of God, the manna. That's what I think of when I think of meat. And then the wine. What do we think of when we think of wine? Wine can represent blood. It can represent teachings, doctrines. And Christ said, "Drink my blood." Blood is also the life. So there's a lot of little underneath parallels in here that we can study and really break down verse by verse. But for sake of time, we're just going through it and getting the brunt of the story here. Verse 17. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. That's going to come in handy in this next chapter. But think about this, you guys. They had such great knowledge, and they were skilled in learning and wisdom and understanding visions and dreams and all that stuff. They ate vegetables and they drank water, and they did not defile themselves with all the foods of Babylon. The Babylon buffet, the hamburgers and pork, and Mountain Dew and steak and dairy and just all that, the cheese, just all that stuff. They had none of it, just vegetables and water. And they were smarter. In fact, look at verse 18. It says, now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so 3 years they came in to stand before the king. And the king communicated with them. And among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. So there was no one like them in all the kingdom, you guys, because he communicated with them, and in communicating with them is like, oh man, there's no one like you guys. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, in all wisdom and understanding, okay, he found them, check this out, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. So his entire cabinet, his government officials, his leaders, everybody, you guys, his mayors and sheriffs and everybody, Daniel and the Hebrews, they were 10 times smarter than everybody in the kingdom. Vegetables and water, that was their diet. And we know their education was the Word of God. And they can understand visions and dreams and the prophecies of the Bible. Isn't that incredible? And because of that, their character, their names were not changed. Because you're going to see later in this book, we're going to see the angel, when he comes, calls them by the name, their Hebrew names. He doesn't call them by their Babylon names. Because their character has not changed. These 4 Hebrews had been born again. And they did not fall away from that, to go into Babylon's brainwashing. So it's absolutely incredible. And then the last 21, it says, and Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Okay, so that sets up chapter 1. We're going to go in next video, we're going to chapter 2, and we're just going to go chapter by chapter by chapter. And just as we see a theme through, and then this is going to open up the entire book of Revelation, you guys. These 2 books, there's nothing like the Bible. First of all, it's the inspired book. It's how God communicates with all of us, and there's nothing like it. The experience that I'm having with it, it's the love of my life. And I never ever thought the Bible, I didn't even know what the Bible was for my whole life. I never read it. I tried to read it, but it just, nothing clicked. But then the Spirit was given to me, came upon me, and Jesus started teaching me the scriptures. I know that's what happened. And the angels are all around me, giving me wisdom and understanding. And we can do much deeper studies, verse by verse. We compare line upon line, search words and phrases and all kinds of, which I do. But for these verse by verses, we're just kind of going through reading and getting kind of the quick brunt of each verse, the themes and what's happening. We'll go much deeper later. So, but all right, God bless you guys. Let's get excited. We're going to continue. My next video will have chapter 2 up, and then we're going to go through that. That's an incredible chapter. The greatest chapter of prophecy. Oh man, wow. It takes us from the time of Babylon all the way down to the second coming. And the United States is part of that. Oh, it's incredible. And we'll see in Revelation 13 it opens everything up. So, but we get the timeline from the dream in chapter 2. So you definitely want to come back for chapter 2, because just going through it, reading it. And here's the thing, I don't understand everything I read, but the more we study, we go over it, and as we compare it with other parts of the Bible, other books, other scriptures, we start seeing all these, everything, it comes to life, and there's nothing like it. We keep doing it, we keep doing it, we keep doing it, and we ask God to teach us. So, all right. Well, God bless you guys. I will see you in chapter 2. All right.